What if the true devastation of war is not written only in the blood and mud of distant front lines, but in the invisible wounds that open behind closed doors, in bureaucratic corridors, and in the silent, suffocating despair of family living rooms? What if the greatest losses are not those tallied by generals, but those quietly borne by mothers, fathers, wives, and children, whose grief is compounded by unanswered questions and broken promises? In Ukraine, beneath the banners of resistance and the chorus of patriotic slogans, a hidden crisis festers out of sight. Bodies go unreported, the number of missing soldiers grows into the tens of thousands, and the compensation funds meant for grieving families mysteriously disappear, as if into thin air. The official figures are stark. Ukraine has exchanged nearly 18,000 of its fallen for fewer than 2,000 Russian casualties. These are not the inventions of wartime propaganda, nor the distortions of enemy media, but cold, unyielding numbers that speak a truth too bleak for the evening news. For centuries, wars have been decided not just by strength of arms, but by the strength of a nation's resolve to care for its own. In the American Civil War, the devastation was not only on the battlefield, but in the endless waiting of families for word of their loved ones. The same patterns echo now. Leaders speak of heroism, of victory, of sacrifice for a greater good, while families are left in limbo, waiting for the compensation payments they were promised. Months become years, and the official assurances crumble into rumors of lost transfers, stolen funds, and bureaucratic inertia that feels as cold as any enemy. As the war grinds on, the initial surge of voluntary enlistment has all but dried up. Now, conscription squads scour the streets, hunting those desperate to avoid the front lines. More than 250,000 Ukrainian soldiers have deserted, greater than the size of Ukraine's entire pre-war army. These are not whispers or rumors, but grim admissions that have leaked out from within the very system meant to maintain order. Across the border, Moldova, a nation that once proudly proclaimed itself neutral, is now rushing headlong toward militarization in the name of integration and reform. Moldovan leaders assure their people that these changes represent progress, but the country's fragile neutrality is being quietly abandoned, and society is being pulled inexorably toward confrontation. The optimism projected from presidential podiums cannot conceal the deepening fissures. Armies begin to disintegrate, families are torn apart, and entire nations are sacrificed on the altar of foreign ambition and internal decay. If you take the official stories at face value, the speeches, the statistics, the carefully curated press releases, you risk missing the true costs, the shattered lives, the vanished funds, the unraveling of entire societies beneath the surface of patriotic rhetoric. To grasp the true fallout, we must look past the speeches and the numbers, and listen to those trapped inside the collapse. Their stories, often shared in hushed voices, far from cameras, expose a reality that official narratives desperately try to hide. When a government enforces silence about its dead, what truths are they so desperate to hide? Throughout history, from the Vietnam War to the Soviet-Afghan conflict, governments have often tried to manage public perception by obscuring the real scale of casualties. In Vietnam, the infamous body count became a metric that distorted truth and undermined trust. In Afghanistan, Soviet authorities routinely underreported losses to maintain morale at home, only for the truth to emerge in the heartbreak of thousands of grieving mothers. No matter how officials try to bury the facts, reality claws its way to the surface. Every time Ukraine and Russia exchange the remains of their fallen, the true scale of loss becomes impossible to deny. For every Russian body returned, Ukraine receives back 200 of its own. This is not a rumor or a piece of propaganda. It is the harsh arithmetic of war. Death keeps its own records, indifferent to politics or pride. Yet even as the bodies return in such heartbreaking numbers, official statements continue to cling to old myths, tales of undying heroism, slogans about progress and resilience. Meanwhile, the growing weight of the dead tears open a gulf between government rhetoric and the grim reality on the ground. No speech or ceremony can mask it for long, especially when the truth is delivered in body bags, and the pain is measured in silent dinners and empty chairs. The tragedy does not end with the casualty lists. It is etched, too, in the ledgers of Ukraine's Ministry of Finance. Families of the dead once heard solemn promises. Compensation would arrive within 3 years. Now those payouts are pushed to 8 years, if they arrive at all. For many, the money simply vanishes, swallowed by bureaucracy, or, as Parliament whispers, outright theft. This is not a new phenomenon. In the aftermath of World War I, soldiers' families in many countries often waited years for their pensions, as inflation and corruption eroded the value and certainty of state support. The same injustices play out now in Ukraine. Stories circulate in hushed tones among lawmakers. Compensation funds, meant for grieving families, have evaporated during mysterious bank transfers. Where did the money go? No one answers on the record, but some private accounts suddenly hold many more zeros. That such matters are relegated to whispers rather than public investigation is a bleak warning sign. The sacrifice of Ukraine's soldiers is met not only with delays and silence, but with outright disappearance of the aid promised to their loved ones. This is far more than a matter of numbers or government budgets. Human dignity itself is at stake, lost not only in the trenches, but in the shadowy offices where decisions are made and promises are broken. When a nation cannot honor its dead or protect their families, it loses more than a war on the battlefield. It risks surrendering its very soul, as happened in the latter days of the Soviet Union, when cynicism and disillusionment undermined the very idea of national unity. But the numbers and the vanishing money are only the surface of a much deeper malaise. Something more insidious is corroding the heart of Ukraine's military and society. The true crisis is not just measured in casualties or missing cash. Beneath it all, a profound collapse of morale and trust is taking hold, threatening to unravel everything that once held the nation together. What remains when a nation exhausts both its volunteers and its hope? In Ukraine, the first wave of patriotic fervor, when volunteers flooded recruitment centers, inspired by a sense of duty and national pride, has faded like the memory of a warm spring. Now, mobilization is not a choice, but a sentence. Every man from 25 to 60 is trapped in a system that offers only 2 options: hide or run. The numbers tell a story of a society in crisis. Hundreds of thousands evade the draft, living behind false identities, locked indoors, or simply vanishing from public life. Official reports admit to more than 250,000 deserters. Unofficial counts soar even higher, approaching 500,000, nearly as many as Ukraine's entire army before the war. These are not mere statistics, but human lives, each one a story of desperation, fear, and broken trust. Patrols now stalk the streets, hunting for men of fighting age. Some slip through checkpoints, bribe their way out, or disappear across foreign borders, risking everything for the chance to escape the front. The state lurches between harsh enforcement and silent dread, sending new recruits to the front lines with fewer than 4 days of training and little more than a rifle. In World War II, the Soviet Union, and later Nazi Germany, resorted to similar last-ditch conscription, sending barely trained boys and old men into the meat grinder when the nation's will had been drained. Morale has collapsed. Soldiers whisper among themselves about senseless, deadly orders and endless attacks that waste lives for little gain. Promises of reform have evaporated. Commands arrive from above, cold and indifferent, with no explanation and no regard for human cost. The bond between leaders and soldiers is broken. Across barracks and trenches, fear is the only certainty. The writings of Erich Maria Remarque and Svetlana Alexievich capture this sense of futility and despair, when orders come from far away, but the price is paid in blood by those on the ground. Meanwhile, the government response hardens. Desertion is now an unforgivable crime. Even those who return voluntarily face prison, with no exceptions. Warnings have ended. Only punishment remains. Not so long ago, a deserter might have received a reprimand or a second chance. Now, the law leaves no room for mercy, reflecting a state under siege, not just from without, but from within. Ukraine is battling not only an invader, but itself. Trust has guttered out, the future workforce is fleeing or falling, and national unity is a slogan stripped of meaning. The stakes are existential, not just lost land, but the slow, suffocating death of the nation's social fabric. In Yugoslavia during the 1990s, similar patterns emerged, a once united society unraveling as war, propaganda, and economic hardship ate away at the bonds that held people together. Yet Ukraine is not alone in this unraveling. Across the border, Moldova stands at its own crossroads, staring into a future that may soon echo Ukraine's tragic descent. In the early 21st century, small states have often found themselves caught between great power rivalries, Georgia in 2008, Syria after 2011, or Libya in 2011. Each time, the local population bore the greatest cost. Moldova's quiet crisis is about to break into the open. Will it follow Ukraine's path into militarization, exhaustion, and disintegration, or find a way to avoid the same fate? Can a small state survive by choosing sides, or does that only make it a bigger target? The lessons of history are sobering. Finland, faced with Soviet aggression in 1939, tried neutrality but was forced into a costly war. Belgium, neutral in 1914 and 1939, was invaded both times. The tragic irony is that neutrality, while noble, often offers no shield when greater powers see opportunity. Moldova, once committed to its fragile neutrality, is now abandoning it at breakneck speed. Over the past year, the government has cast aside non-alignment, launching a rapid buildup of its armed forces and rewriting defense doctrine to echo North Atlantic Treaty Organization templates. The message is unmistakable. Moldova is picking a side, and doing so under intense pressure. This transformation is dizzying. Recent elections, shaped heavily by the Moldovan diaspora, have sparked accusations of manipulation from the opposition, who argue the vote was engineered for the pro-Western camp. Even before the ballots cooled, new national security papers labeled Russia as the main threat, mentioned by name dozens of times. Fear is not just in the air, it is now official policy, inscribed in government documents and broadcast across the media. Western influence is surging in. Military advisors from the alliance, integration officers, and trainers now embed themselves deep in Moldova's defense institutions. The army's budget and ranks have grown more in 1 year than in the previous 10. Armored vehicles patrol the capital's streets, while joint drills with foreign troops are becoming a routine spectacle. In a matter of months, Moldova has transformed from a sleepy neutral state to a garrison on alert. But this militarization carries grave risks. Moldova's eastern border faces Transnistria, a breakaway enclave guarded by thousands of Russian nationals and home to one of the continent's largest ammunition depots. Any spark here could pull Moldova into direct conflict with Moscow, igniting a war it could never hope to control. In 2014, the world watched as Crimea and eastern Ukraine were swiftly enveloped in conflict after similar escalations. Moldova's situation is arguably even more precarious. At home, dissent is growing. The opposition, including ex-presidents and prominent civic leaders, warn that Moldova is not being protected, but maneuvered toward catastrophe. In their words, the country is becoming cannon fodder, a pawn in a larger game, its sovereignty wagered for uncertain promises from distant allies. The tragedy is not abstract. Moldova now faces not integration, but the terrifying prospect of being the next front line in a much larger struggle. The price could be national unity, peace, and countless lives, lost in a war that ordinary Moldovans never chose. In a country of just over 2 million people, a major conflict would be catastrophic beyond measure. As Moldova edges toward the abyss, the illusion of agency vanishes. The fate of small states now hinges less on their own choices than on the ambitions and missteps of greater powers. From the Balkans to the Caucasus, history is littered with the remains of nations crushed in the gears of geopolitics. Is this chaos just a tragic accident, Or are we all spectators as great powers move human lives like chess pieces? Step back from the battlefields in Ukraine and Moldova, and the pattern shifts. Beneath the smoke lies a ruthless contest for influence, profit, and survival on a global scale. The United States has chosen energy sanctions as its primary weapon against Russia, trying to pull China into its strategy. But China refuses, calling these measures illegal and unilateral, making it clear that it will not be strong-armed into following Washington's script. In the 1950s, the United States tried to isolate China with trade embargoes, only to see China adapt and seek new partners. The same dynamics are visible today. Instead, China plays its own game, deepening its alliance with Moscow. Together, Beijing and Moscow exploit cracks in the global system, rerouting oil and gas through third countries. These shadow trades keep their economies running and dull the bite of Western sanctions. In the 1980s, Iran famously used similar tactics to evade sanctions, buying and selling oil through intermediaries. The world's financial network is a labyrinth, and those determined to bend the rules can often find a way. Europe, meanwhile, is caught in a worsening energy crunch. With prices soaring and supplies shrinking, governments scramble for alternatives, only to find themselves dependent on the very countries they tried to punish. Sanctions meant to isolate Russia rebound, threatening industries and livelihoods across the continent. In Germany, factories slow production. In Hungary and Slovakia, leaders quietly complain about the cost of confrontation. The same cycle played out in the 1970s, when the oil embargo exposed Europe's vulnerabilities. For the Kremlin, the pressure stings, but does not cripple. Russian oil and gas still flow, not openly to the West, but through intricate networks, often aided by nations willing to overlook the rules in exchange for profit. Turkey, India, and even some European countries have found ways to keep the energy flowing, despite public pronouncements to the contrary. Small states like Moldova are swept into this high-stakes contest, rarely able to control their own destinies. Their economies, energy security, and political stability are pulled apart by larger powers chasing their own agendas. In 2008, Georgia tried to assert independence, only to be caught in a war it could not win. Moldova's leaders must now navigate a maze with no good exits. At the center is realpolitik. Ideals such as democracy and solidarity sound noble, but the real levers are energy, money, and leverage. Alliances shift for profit, and backroom deals outweigh public speeches. In the Cold War, the rhetoric was about freedom, but the reality was about oil, pipelines, and spheres of influence. For distant observers, the danger is believing that lofty words or moral clarity decide outcomes. In truth, it is power and cold pragmatism that shape events. The cost, in lost lives, broken societies, and evaporated budgets, lands on ordinary people, not the strategists. The families who wait in vain for compensation, the soldiers who desert in despair, the children who lose their homes. These are the true casualties. So, what can we truly learn from the chaos and cynicism these crises reveal? What warnings should we heed as the next chapter begins? The next act will dive deeper into the unraveling of state capacity and credibility, tracing how propaganda, disinformation, and political decay fuel the downward spiral. The stakes rise as we examine the true price of choices made in distant capitals. In the 1990s, Yugoslavia's disintegration was preceded by a similar collapse of trust and state capacity. Propaganda replaced truth, and the only winners were those who profited from confusion. Numbers, and the silence between them, never lie. Peel back the slogans and spreadsheets. Who gains when truth is smothered? The stories we are sold, of valor, unity, unbreakable resolve, shatter against the ledgers and the rows of body bags. For every Ukrainian body sent home, more than 10 Russian corpses cross the border. No speech can mask the scale of this loss. Each funeral, every vanished payment to a grieving family, points to rot at the core. Compensation, once pledged within 3 years, now drags on for 8, if it comes at all. Trillions in aid and donations swirl through the system, yet in Parliament, Whispers of missing payouts breed suspicion. That these tragedies are only discussed in hushed tones, never in public, reveals a machinery that annihilates accountability and manufactures excuses. Desertion is no longer taboo. It is an exodus. Over 250,000 Ukrainian soldiers have left their units, officially. Unofficial tallies hint at twice that number, perhaps 500,000 gone. Volunteers are almost extinct, replaced by forced roundups and barricaded neighborhoods. This is not the heartbeat of a nation mobilized. It is the panic of a state devouring its own future. The last time Europe saw such mass flight was during the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, a warning that when faith in the system dies, so too does the nation itself. As the front lines crumble and the state tightens its grip, society is trapped between crackdowns and propaganda. Laws harden, hope withers. Families dread both the letter from the front and the silence from the bank. With every exchange of the dead, the illusion of stability fractures, and the truth howls through. This is not resilience, but exhaustion. People are not fleeing duty, they are escaping a system that has lost its soul. Who profits as lives are wasted, funds disappear, and oversight retreats into darkness? Policies drafted in distant capitals, defended with hollow rhetoric, keep the masquerade alive. But day by day, more realize they are not partners, only pawns. If nothing changes, if silence reigns and questions are crushed, whole societies may be sacrificed on the altar of pride, propaganda, and power. This is not some remote disaster. It is the price we pay for letting easy answers and heroic myths replace hard questions about cost and consequence. So ask, who benefits? Who is shielded by this silence? And what will become of Ukraine, of Moldova, of us all, if truth is never demanded? The answers may be uncomfortable, but they are necessary if we are to avoid repeating the tragedies of the past, and if we want to build a future where dignity and transparency matter more than slogans and empty promises.